Richard, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Pamela. How are you doing?
I'm good. So this is not your first audiobook. How did you get into literary narration?
I've been doing audiobooks for some time now. It's more recently been working with Audible, but I did work with Naxos a few years ago. And I think the first one that I ever tackled was in conjunction with a television series I'd done, Robin Hood, when I was asked to read some of the stories in audiobook form. And I jumped on the opportunity because I was in the middle of shooting it, and I was able to basically do little impressions of all the actors that I was working with, which I found highly amusing. But I just really enjoy the format, and I enjoy being alone with a microphone and having no other tricks up my sleeve other than just my voice.
But I would think as an actor, doing a role both on television and then an audiobook would be a particular challenge because you've already conceived of the role and I would imagine relied on certain physical attributes which you then don't have when you're doing the audio version.
Yes, and the thing is with those audiobooks, the world was already created for me by the production design. And often, for example, I then read some Georgette Heyer, which was a world that I didn't know very well. That period of time isn't familiar to me, so I was really relying on her writing to stimulate my visual imagination, and then I proceed to describe what I'm seeing in my mind. Dickens is slightly different because I'd read a lot of Dickens through my youth, but then I was in a stage production of David Copperfield, which strangely didn't really influence the what I was visualizing as I read this particular book, but certainly voices and performances of my friends that I was on stage with have kind of remained in the back of my mind as sort of echoes.
And who did you play in that production?
I played Uriah Heep, which was sort of unlikely casting for me. I don't think I matched him physically, but it was a great challenge, and it was the first time I'd really made a kind of transformation of my body and my voice in theatre. I sort of revisited Uriah both in the audiobook, but also in a recent television series which I did. I played Francis Dolarhyde in Hannibal, and I think there were echoes of Uriah Heep in Francis Dolarhyde. It's so interesting how these threads sort of link to other characters that you play. But and of course I came to the David Copperfield audiobook having recently played Francis Dolarhyde, so I think there were little connections.
I'll also have to throw in, just because you mentioned the art of physical transformation, that you did, of course, play Thorin Oakenshield in the Hobbit movies, which as someone who's 6'2", you also had to do a little bit of transforming to get into dwarf-like shape.
That's very true. I mean, that's something which, again, is... that's in the hands of the CGI and the filmmaker. But were I to voice Thorin Oakenshield in an audiobook form, I think I would probably be using the same voice that I used on screen. I don't think I'd be trying to make him sound smaller.
But it's interesting because, one thing that The Hobbit has in common with David Copperfield is that these are books that are both incredibly beloved and also books that people tend to read at a relatively young, impressionable age, and have very sort of, beloved, formative experiences and impressions of these characters. Is that intimidating to take those kind of roles on?
You know what? Not really. It was not something that I'd considered. I mean, I was given a choice of books, but I picked David Copperfield because I think there is a perception of the Victorian novelist which is a sort of slightly stuffy, stifled, overly verbose writing style, which I wanted to sort of, break out of. Mm-hmm. And I know that David Copperfield was written in first person as a diary form, and I just thought that's a perfect opportunity to read the voice of the character and the author in the same book. And, Dickens' humor and his observation of his society that he was living in, particularly the legal system that he was working in. I just thought there was something relevant about it. But at the same time, it was an amazing story.
Did you read Bleak House as well, sort of in preparation for the narration?
I have read Bleak House a while ago, but I didn't touch on it for this. I just really focused on the 1,000 or so plus pages of David Copperfield just for this one. But yeah, it was surprising to me when it came out at 36 hours. I thought maybe I should have read a little faster, but it takes the time that it takes, and
right.
That's one of the wonderful things about Audible and the way that they present their product is that you can take as long as you want to listen to this. And I never expect people to listen to it in one sitting. It can take them weeks, and they can come back chapter by chapter, and it's up to me to sort of keep them with the story. So hopefully we achieved that.
What was the preparation like?
You read the book as quickly as you can because there is a fairly limited amount of time before you can go in there. So reading the book and really just making a list of every single character that you're going to voice and providing them with an identifiable voice which is different to everybody else so that we know who we're listening to when we come back to them, because that's one of Dickens' traits as well, is that he'll introduce a character in chapter 1 and then they won't come back until chapter 15 or something, and you have to be very specific about the quality of the voice, and often Dickens' description of character gives you that window into who they are and what they sound like, and I have to do it without too much judgment, although the Murdstones were quite difficult to sort of empathize with and make them sound like good, decent people, because I did have a judgment on those two characters. I didn't see them as particularly benevolent, so you create a voice for them which is reflective of that, but at the same time trying to make them human rather than just villainous. But it's as simple as that, and often I mark up the pages so that the sentences, which are extremely long and that can ramble a little bit if you don't have a clear kind of destination in mind, and you provide yourself with little stepping stones so that you can make sense of those long Victorian sentences.
Did you have to, go back and listen to your own recordings of characters that you hadn't visited in a number of chapters to think, how did Mr. Micawber sound? How did I do that character?
When I first started doing audiobooks, I would have a list on the wall beside me of the quality of the voice, and I'd usually write 3 words to describe what the voice sounded like, whether it was a regional accent, the tone of the voice, the timbre of the voice. But I don't need to do that anymore because the technicians in the editing suite have this amazing ability. The first time you speak as that character, they will take a little soundbite and pop it in a list themselves, so that on chapter 26, I can say to them, how did Mr. Micawber sound? And they'll play me back.
Oh, wow.
A little version of that character. But what's interesting, as you go along, sometimes a character can bed in and really develop. So then I would request that I go back to the beginning of where the character first arrives and revoice that, because the voice has slightly changed or has become, a bit more kind of in my body. So there is the opportunity to do that on a digital recording as well. That's
kind of disappointing, because I wanted to hear what your 3-word descriptions were of Mr. Micawber and Uriah Heep. And
I think Uriah was Delphy, wiry, and whiny.
Did the way you played his character change from when you had first done that character on stage?
Yeah, again, interestingly, I thought that Uriah would be the easiest character for me to voice when doing the audiobook, and the most satisfying because I played him. But what I realized was that when I played him on stage, it was a very physical manifestation of a man, because Dickens describes his body movements very clearly. And in the audio studio, you have to sit very still. And of course, I started writhing around, and they're on the microphone saying, "I'm sorry, you have to sit still. We can hear you moving." And I was like, "Well, I can't do this voice without kind of writhing and talking, making him kind of, what's the word, to sort of grind himself physically." So it was less satisfying than I thought it was going to be, but that's part of the challenge. Is a lot of these characters that Dickens creates are so physically described that keeping still in the studio so that you don't get ambient sound and creating that voice is one of the challenges.
Well, who was your favorite character to play in the narration?
I had a few, actually. One of them that I really amused myself with was Miss Moucher, because it had taken me by surprise a little bit. I think I'd forgotten about her. And then when it came to reading it, I just threw something in off the top of my head.
Can you give us a little bit of it?
She's kind of from Liverpool. She talks like this. She's got a really high little voice. Mm-hmm. And I don't know who I'd based it on. I think there was a famous British drag act called Lily Savage. I think there was a little bit of him, her in my head, and something else. I can't remember. But she's tiny as well, and she has to hop up and down on tables. So it was a little bit of an emergency voice, but in the end, it sort of worked out kind of quite funny and amusing because she speaks so quickly, and she's kind of a wounded little thing. But I enjoyed her a lot.
Before I let you go, if you had sort of one dream novel that you could narrate the audiobook version of, what would it be?
I think I'd really like to have a crack at Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. That's one of the books that was the first time I'd really read something as an adult which was very much tied into where I was going as an actor. I was just about to start drama school, and it was stimulating a darker side of my imagination. Because normally I read for escape and for fantasy, and this was really kind of tapping into sort of the dark side of my personality and the things that I was interested in exploring, So Crime and Punishment led on to a fascination with Macbeth, and actually all of the characters many of the characters that I've played in my career, I think started with the fascination with Raskolnikov. So yeah, that would be something I'd like to read.
All right. Well, let's hope some audiobook publishing casting person is listening. Richard, thank you so much.
Thanks. Nice to talk to you.
You too. That was Richard Armitidge. He is the narrator of a new version of David Copperfield from Audible.